إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان ومنا معهم يا أرحم الراحمين. إخواني في الله, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is the third lessons about the four-guarded Khalifa with the introduction of the four-guarded and then Abu Bakr. And today, inshallah, we will talk about the end of Hurub al-Ridda, or the apostasy wars, and a beginning of a new conquest that turned the world's four corners of the world into a new world. We use this world these days quite often, but then during that time we will see that the world changed under the guidance of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on the helm of that in Medina, Sharafah Allah, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali. For 30 years, radiyallahu anhum wa ardahum, they will spread justice and Islam amongst all nations, radiyallahu anhum wa ardahum. Last time we talked about Abu Bakr decision on fighting those who decided not to pay zakah, and as well he decided to fight against the false prophets, and Al-Aswad al-Unsi was killed, and Tulayha al-Uzdi ran away to Iraq, and we have seen Sajah went to her own people in Taghlib. Malik ibn Nuwayra was killed, and Musaylam al-Kadhab alayhi min Allah ma yastahiq, who represented the major challenge to Abu Bakr and Islam, was killed. Now Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah lost so many of his men. This is just a list of some of the companions who attended Badr and Uhud and many of the battles of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam from Al-Ansar wal Muhajirin, like Thabit ibn Qais ibn Shams al-Ansari radiyallahu an, wa Zayd ibn al-Khattab, the brother of Umar ibn al-Khattab, wa Mu'an radiyallahu an, wa Abdullah ibn Suhayl ibn Amr radiyallahu an, wa Abu Dujana Sammak ibn Kharasha, we all remember him in the battle of Uhud, wa Abbad ibn Bishr. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam once stood outside his house to listen to the Quran. He had a beautiful voice, radiyallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'in. Wa Tufayl ibn Amr al-Dusi, who came very early to Islam in Mecca and followed Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And many others were killed, and you can see most of them are Qurra, meaning they learned the Quran by heart. The battle finished. Musaylama and many of his soldiers basically were killed in that garden. They call it the Garden of Death. Khalid looked at his troops. He lost as well over 500 of them. And radiallahu anhu wa ardah started to regroup his army again to attack Al-Yamama. Everything was happening outside Al-Yamama. That's how Musaylama was 100% comfortable that he will defeat the Muslims, 40,000 against Khalid's side of 12,000. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give Khalid and the Muslims the victory on the day. And now Khalid looked, and he can now head to the fortress of Al-Yamama. Al-Yamama, more than 100,000+ lived in Al-Yamama. So what he had there was basically their fighters. We said when he was heading to Al-Yamama, he captured some of the people of Banu Hanifa, and he kept only one prisoner by the name Muja'a ibn Murara al-Hanafi. He was one of the leaders, and he kept him as a prisoner. Now Khalid, as he was looking at the battlefield, Muja'a ibn Murara came out. She said, Ya Khalid, enough bloodshed. Let me go and talk to my people so they can surrender to you. Khalid started to surrender jizya for you. Khalid said, pay jizya and then go and join Muslims. The orders from Abu Bakr was given. Those people, unless they go back to Islam. He said, let me go. And I'll talk to them. He did. Of course, he was not going to them. Came back to Khalid. He said, okay, they will surrender. They will give you the jizya and the gold, but no prisoners. Khalid again looked at the situation and he said, yes, I agree. So he took his troop, now entering Al-Yamama. When the fortress opened, he looked around, children, women. He said, Ya Muja'a, you deceived me. It's my people. What do you expect me to do? Khalid basically accepted that. At that time, Abu Bakr sent a letter to Khalid. Do not accept any deals with the people of Al-Yamama. Finish them all because of what they have done. Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Khalifat Rasulullah, he wrote back a letter saying, it's too late. I've already signed the agreement with them, and basically they paid the jizya, and now they started to go back to Islam. And they did, and they started to participate later on the conquest of the Persians and the Romans. One of those that Khalid took as a prisoner or slave was a woman that Ali radiallahu anhu wa ardah married, and she gave him a child by the name of Muhammad. His nickname in the history of the books, and you will see his name especially during the time of Al-Hasan wal-Husayn wal-Fitna, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyya, one of the ulama of this ummah, al-Tabi'een. He's not a Sahabi, radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'een, and he will have a say later on with his brother Al-Hasan wal-Husayn in what was happening across that part of the world in Al-Kufa. When the Khalid radiallahu anhu ardah finished with the Al-Murtaddeen, Abu Bakr asked him to stay. Don't come back. Just have the rest with the army. At that time in Medina, Umar and the companions radiallahu anhum gathered, and they started to put forward to Abu Bakr Al Sadiq radiallahu anhu ardah the idea of collecting the Quran, because so many of the readers were killed in the battle of Al-Yamama, and Abu Bakr at the beginning refused, and then after that radiallahu anhu ardah accepted the idea, and that was the first time the Quran will be picked up from the hearts of the companions and from many different as well area of compilation of the Quran, like papers or the leather from the animals. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu ardah, 1 month after Al-Murtaddeen, which it took him 1 year to put an end to this fitna, decided to send his troops now further northeast, the south of Iraq. And in that part of the world, we have one of the two superpowers, the Persian Empire, and later on, radiallahu anhu ardah, will start to move his troops to the west, northwest of Arabia, to the Roman Empire. And if we look at these two empires, they represented the power of the time of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali. By the end of time of the Uthman radiallahu anh, the third Khalifa, year 35, there was no more Persian Empire. Dua in Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as we will see. The Roman, of course, we know that they have lost a major part of their empire in Constantinople, but that happens later on, 1450, with a young man barely 20 years of age, by the name of Muhammad al-Fatih alayhi rahmatullah. Wal hadith to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that you will conquer Persia and Rome, and both of them will fall in the hands of the Muslims. And we have seen Persia basically went down to the Muslims. The Persian empires, I will basically talk about two characters, both of them mentioned in the Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Of course, the Persians, they were great civilization that ruled for over 1200 years. And they ruled in what we call today Iran, Iraq, Minor Asia, all the way to China. And we will see in the clashes that they had with their arch enemies, the Romans, sometimes their map actually expanded to include Bilad al-Sham in Syria and Palestine and Lebanon and Jordan, and even north of Africa, because these areas were all controlled by the Romans. Their main capital, Al-Madain, and the reason they call it Al-Madain, Madain is a plural for Medinas. They said they had 3 beautiful cities established by Ardashir, one of their very strong, well-known king. And for that reason, they call it Al-Madain. Well, Madain actually was built in Iraq on the river of Dijla. And we know that part of the world is very rich and wealth with the minerals and, of course, the rivers that they have. They used to call their king Shahin Shah, or King of Kings. The religion, they worshipped many, but the most important that we know of is the fire. And we have a companion by the name of Salman radiallahu anhu warda, who used to actually, he as a young boy grow up in that sort of environment, and he went high in the religious ranking that he at one stage started to look after the fire himself in a temple. So, and that's a very high position, and they have to keep it 24/7. He used to do that, radiallahu anhu warda. They had a very harsh class system, the top, and of course the majority were either slaves or farmers. This is very close to what the Romans had at that stage. And the political life always in the hands of the kings and his nobles and religious establishment. In between, we will see some reforms started to take place to bring in the average Persians to participate in the political and the social and the class system. And the empire had expanded, as I said, and the last king is the one that was killed during the time of Osman radiallahu anhu arda. His name is Yazdagerd, and we will see him having a conversation with the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam later on. The important one for us is Kisra Anushirwan. Kisra Anushirwan is important for him. They used to call him the king or the just king. He was just. He started to change the system. He started to bring in those classes that they were basically oppressed and let them to take part in the life of the Persian Empire. His father started these reforms, and he basically pushed it and managed to enlarge his empire. He laid the foundations for many cities, palaces, and also the repair of trade routes, as well as the building of numerous bridges and dams. They said he was the one that started the Silk Route between China and East and the West. He had so many wars against their arch rivals, the Romans, and he basically pushed them all the way back to Asia, Bilad al-Sham, and the most important battle that he had was the name of Lazish War. Now we're talking here about the areas where the Romans used to go and control in Abkhazia and Georgia. And these wars lasted for all his life. His name for the Persians, emperors, synonymous or close or like that of Caesar for the Romans. They respect him and they look at him as a major figure in their civilization. Kisra Anushirwan, again, his army was in a discipline superior to the Byzantine and well paid. So why am I saying this? Because we need to understand that when these armies, when these empires meet the Muslims, if you remember the Battle of Badr, it wasn't a war. Rasulullah ﷺ was going out to intercept a caravan. Anybody's coming? Yes. So what do you take with you? We had only 2 horses. Yes? 70 shields. This is going to be repeated in these wars, but of course the numbers will be more, but the equipments will never be equal to the Romans. So here we've got armies that actually get paid, they get fed. So they looked after with the different uniforms, different weapons that we will see. For example, here, he put military districts with generals. He had 4 districts. And he introduced certain equipments for his soldiers. So the horsemen, and he will have a helmet, a gorget, a chain mail shirt to protect them, leg armor, gauntlets, sword, shield, 2 bows with spare string, 30 arrows, axe, and a horse armor. Now, when you look at what they have, it's very difficult to fight against such army. And when you look, inshallah, we will look at the Muslims and how their equipments, which is, if we look at, as we said, the bow and the arrow, the Arabs or the Muslims can go as far as 30 or 40 meters, where the Persians or the Romans can go up to 100. So 2 or 3 times. And that, of course, creates a lot of problems for the Muslim armies during that time. So Kisra Anushirwan made sure that his army is superior, but he was the one that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was born in his time. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was born, we said that the fire of the Majus basically extinguishes, which is put down for the first time. And that was a major question mark for Kisra Anushirwan. And 14 of his balconies in his palaces collapsed. And that was a sign that he actually gathered his religious people and asked what's happening. They told him that this is the time of a prophet and he basically will rule. How long, how many years that will happen? He said, he will go about 10, 14 emperors to be able to control Persia. 14 emperors. If we look at each one like him, he ruled for 37 years. So that we're looking at a very long period of time. So he said, that's too long. We'll leave it at that. Now, he died, and his son came. This, basically, son is important for us. Again, he's King of Kings, and he's the one that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam sent Abdullah ibn Hudhafa radiyallahu anhu wa ardah with the letter to invite him to Islam. And of course, when he received that letter from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he didn't even bother to read it, because when they started to translate when Muhammad Rasulullah, he said a Bedouin, for them a starving man, a man that has nothing, putting his name before me. He started to basically tear apart that letter, and we all know that he asked his governor in Yemen to send 2 or 3 policemen to this man in Medina, put him under chains and bring him to Al-Madain. I want to see him. And they did. They sent these men to Rasulullah ﷺ in Medina. They arrived, and Rasulullah ﷺ asked them about their mission as a messengers, and he asked them to stay overnight and he will talk to them. The second morning, Rasulullah ﷺ said to them, your king, your God, is dead. Who told you? My God. And that's actually one of the reasons that Al-Yemen, because that governor was from Al-Yemen who sent those policemen to put Rasulullah ﷺ under arrest. When the governor said, how did you know that? He said, my God told me. When they went back to Yemen and told the governor the story, he told them, make sure that you put that date and ticket. So when we get the news from Persia, which takes about a month or more, we compare, and they did, and they became Muslims. Anyway, Rasulullah ﷺ made dua. And when he heard that he dealt with his letter the way he did, he said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tear apart his empire. And that actually happened very quickly. Basically, that man was killed. That emperor was killed by his own son, Seerah. Seerah ruled for 9 months, and he was a very vicious man. He actually killed all of his family so he can be on top. They managed to hide some of them, and his own son basically killed him, and then that son as well was killed by Shahriraz. So you see names coming from that part of the world. That Shahriraz was killed after 40 days. He was not from the royal families. He's not from the sacred blood. So the general decided to kill him, and they replaced him with one of the daughters of Kisra. Her name was Buran. The reason that we're saying her name is because Rasulullah ﷺ, there is a hadith sahih about Rasulullah ﷺ when he heard that Buran became the Kisra, or the new head of the Persian Empire, he ﷺ made the statement that no people will basically succeed having a woman on their helm. And she was as well, after 1.5 years, was killed, and then she replaced by Yazdajard. So if you have count how many were killed in a very small or a very short period of time, you will see that Dua al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had a quick effect on their political establishment. Of course, this all affects the life or the politics of the Persian Empire, and with that Yazdajard came, and he lasted actually for as long as Osman radiallahu anhu arda. We've said we will see how actually he dealt with Al-Qadisiyah, and before that how he dealt with Khalid. When Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas entered the Al-Madain, which is the capital, he was reading from Surah Ad-Dukhan, Kam Taraku. When they entered, the Muslims, they couldn't believe what they see in front of them. And Madain was a place that basically unheard of. It's for them like a dream. And we'll explain how much booty they had from Al-Madain, and they sent to Al-Madinah, to Umar ibn al-Khattab, who actually cried when he had all this wealth in front of him. And Sa'd radiallahu anhu arda was reading this surah as he was entering that huge palace, saying, Kam taraku min jannatin wa ayun, how much they have left behind of Jannat, which is paradise. Just to show you, this is what Allah described the situation there for the Pharaoh, and as well for those who ruled in this part of the world. And this is what you always see with dictators or people that go with the extreme. They have so much wealth. And what happens with that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we have been giving them to the believers who rules after. So this ayat in Surah Dukhan, when you read it, it's actually reflection of what was happening during that time. And when you compare this with what the Muslim had in Arabia, of course, there is no comparison between the two. But at the same time, radiallahu anhum wa ardahum, ad-dunya didn't take them. They were basically, they lived and they died in the same way Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam left them. On the other side, we had the Romans, and the Romans established themselves 657 before Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, a city of Byzantine. Those people came from Greece, depends now what kind of books of history that you read. In 330 after Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, the Emperor Constantine decided to embrace Christianity. And he basically started to have a capital in Rome, and later on we'll see what he will do. In 313, like I said, he embraced Christianity and became the official religion of the Romans and the Byzantine. In 395, he gave the empire, he actually divided the empire between his sons, one in Rome and one in Constantinople. So one of his sons ruled Rome and the other son ruled Constantinople. And we know that Constantinople, as I said earlier, fell in 1453 on the hands of Muhammad al-Fatih, or the conqueror, alayhi rahmatullah, and they name it or rename it to, we call it today Istanbul, that we all know about that. Now, Heracles basically was defeated by the Anushirwan, and that was documented in the Quran in Surah Al-Rum. Surah Al-Rum, or the Romans, Alif Lam Mim Ghulibat Al-Rum. This ayat came to Rasulullah ﷺ, letting him know that the Romans were defeated to who? To the Persians. Fi adna al-ard. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ فِي بِضْعِ سِنِينَ. And then after that, they will basically defeat the Persians. And this ayat actually tell you as well that Rasulullah ﷺ and the companions were aware of what's happening around them in terms of politics. And they were very happy to hear the fact that the Romans defeated the Persians. And that, some, like Tabari said, happened during the Battle of Badr. So the Battle of Badr happened in year 2 in Medina, and the Romans defeated the Persians exactly in that year. The Kuffar, of course, were not happy with it, because the Persians were people of idol worshippers, where the Romans were basically people of the book. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, في بضع سنين لله الأمر من قبل ومن بعد ويومئذ يفرح المؤمنون, which is the people, the followers of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Heracles was a very religious man, and he basically, when he won his battle against the Persians, he decided to make Hajj. So all the way from Constantinople to Palestine, رجعها الله للمسلمين, he actually walked barefooted to show his humbleness and so forth. But after defeating the Persians, he was about to have a new era in the life of the Romans, and that is the emerging of the Muslims from Arabia. And of course, within a short period of time, they managed to conquer Iraq, Armenia, and Egypt. What happened to Heracles and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as well? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sent Duhya al-Kalbi with a letter inviting him to Islam. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ Al Imran. And this book, or this letter, actually still exists until today. That the same letter that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sent to Heracles. Did he basically submit to Islam? No, he didn't. But he didn't humiliate. He didn't humiliate the messenger of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He actually welcomed him, and he asked him questions. And of course, the news for Heracles, being a religious and a scholar in his own right, know that this is the time of a prophet. But when we look at the prophets and the messengers that Allah has sent, most of them came in Bilad al-Sham. Most of them came in Bilad al-Sham. And only very few came to Egypt, like Musa and Harun and Yusuf, even Yusuf in Bilad al-Sham, and he migrated to Egypt. And some people say Idris. Iraq, we will have Nuh, Ibrahim, Lut, Zunnun. These are in Iraq. But when you look at the Quran, it's all Bilad al-Sham. All Bilad al-Sham, Ishaq, Yaqub, and the rest, Isa, Zakaria, Yahya, they are all Ilyas from Bilad al-Sham. That's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the hadith, one of the companions asked, where to go, Ya Rasulullah, if things happened, meaning the arrival of the major hours. He said, Alaykum bi Bilad al-Sham. You migrate to Bilad al-Sham. And Bilad al-Sham, you will see most of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam buried in Bilad al-Sham, in that part of the world. As well, Abu Sufyan met with Heracles, and we know that he had even a longer conversation with Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu arda. This has actually happened after Badr and Uhud wal Ahzab, and Abu Sufyan, head of Quraysh, يعني still traveling. لإلى في قريش إلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف. They used to travel for business, and Heracles actually wanted to meet somebody that knows a little bit more about this man who claimed to be a prophet. And he came across Abu Sufyan, and he asked him question about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is he had descendants from a noble family? Yes. Any one of his family assumed kingship? We've covered that in the Seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Describe his followers. They are weak, vulnerable, slaves. We know that. Their numbers growing or decreasing? They are growing. And of course, at the end, he said, if what you said to me is the truth, then this man will control this land under my feet one day. This is how it looks, the Roman Empire during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the four guided Khalifa. The Constantinople in one side in the east, Rome on the west. And the world basically was controlled by the two major empires, and you can see that the Byzantine and the Roman Empire controlled most of Bilad al-Sham and North Africa, all the way to Spain, where the Persia looked at the other side to Minor Asia, and as well up in the north. They said that they had Armenia, and we've said before Abkhazia, and they did have at one stage relationship with the Turks, which they used to have a lot of nomads tribes that they used to invade Persia, but at one stage they had relationship with them and managed to get them on their side. We know as well that this is one of the things that I'm sure all of you would know, the Colosseum, which sits in Rome. Some said that it can take up to 50,000. This is now the glory of Rome and how strong and rich civilization was. It has about 50,000 spectators, 80 entrances. And if you look at the bottom there, this is basically where they put the animals and the slaves before they come out to fight till death. The fighting killed off whole species. They said that they used to have a lot of celebration every year when they have emperors or they have victories. They would bring slaves and they would bring very rare animals to fight. And with that, there's so many animals were basically slaughtered in a Colosseum. And they said that the number of lions, jaguars, and tigers across the globe basically started to decrease. According to some Romans hunting absolutely devastated the wildlife of North Africa and the entire Mediterranean regions. Again, this is something that we all see in either movies or in documentaries. They call them gladiators. These gladiators are basically oppressed people. The best to call them are slaves that they captured in war, and they are the lowest in the community or the societies. They have no rights, and basically they do what they get told by their masters. It is estimated that the games played in a Colosseum for hundreds of years have been taking the lives of about 500,000 people and over 1 million wild animals. So why am I saying these things? Because we're talking to Ummah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the shift when you are a gladiator, as they call it, or a slave, or even a citizen, and all of a sudden we've got a Khalifa like Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'in, bringing in the society all equal, as we believe in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no such thing as gladiators or slaves or oppressing people. It's equality and justice, whether you're a Muslim or not. And that's why most of these parts of the world, when Islam went to their shores, they waited to see what these new invaders will do. Are they going to make us like what we see in Persia or in the Roman Empire, killing each other? And of course, in no time, they started to realize totally the opposite. Umar would pick up the best of the companions to go to Bilad al-Sham and Egypt and Iraq to teach those people Islam. The first thing that you do in these areas is to slave people and take their women and take their lands. But to educate them, unheard of. Unheard of. So Abu Darda will be going into a masjid and he will have many halaqah. He said, because there's so many of them, I had to have a leader. So I will go and my ears will be listening, and if they have anything wrong with reading of the Quran, I will take the lead and I will let him know, and then he will go and correct. What sort of invading parties are these people? They're coming to educate us, embrace us. This is basically the Romans and how them and their foes, the Persians, lived. Now, if I'm going to talk about Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, it's very important to understand that Abu Bakr and Khalid ibn al-Walid, both of them worked together very close. Politically, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wa ardah. The military part, al-Murtaddeen, Khalid ibn al-Walid. The conquest, Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid ibn al-Walid, in 2 years, which is the reign of Abu Bakr, was the head of his army, be it in Iraq or in Bilad al-Sham. So if we talk about Khalid, as we all know, he's Sayfullah al-Maslul, radiallahu anhu wa ardah. He fought over 100 battles. He didn't lose any of them, including the one against Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Uhud. So he fought against the kuffar, al-Murtaddeen. He fought against the Persians, 15 battles. The Romans, and he fought against the Arab Christians and the Arab who were in the side of the Persians. So we have al-Manazira, Arabs who were basically belongs to the Persian Empire, and al-Ghasasina, Christian, belongs to the Romans, and he never lost one battle. He came to Islam radiallahu anhu wa ardah in year 7. In year 7, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam actually sent a letter to his brother radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'in and invited Khalid to Islam. Khalid, fil hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and all of you know the hadith of Sayfullah al-Maslul, he gave him that name, the sword of Allah. Khalid himself said in that day, in the battle of Mu'tah, he broke 9 swords. And Khalid is a tall man. He is very tall man. When he gets on a horse, he actually can touch the ground. So he had to raise his foot to be able to ride and go fast. Radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'in. And he would use two hands. So he was more or less like a killing machine. No one can stand against him. He said, I basically, radiallahu anhu wa ardah, in the battle of Mu'tah, 9 swords were broken in my hand and nothing was left in my hand except a Yemenite sword of mine. This was the last one that he had. And Khalid from Bani Makhzum, and Banu Makhzum, one of the most important tribes in Quraysh, they basically looked after the army and especially the horsemen. Bani Makhzum are well known all across. Al-Mughira, the grandfather of Khalid ibn al-Walid, well known. Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira himself is basically the arch enemy of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he was the one that ridiculed Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. How come this man received the Quran and I am the most honorable man of Quraysh didn't receive that Quran? Abu Huzaifa ibn al-Mughira as well, one of the clans who carried the black stone and put it back to its place when the Kaaba was collapsed. Abu Umayyah ibn al-Mughira, they used to call him Zayd al-Rakib. Zayd al-Rakib means if you travel with him, you are not to bring any food. He will look after you. And for that, he was basically called him Zayd al-Rakib. Al-Rakib is when you travel from one area to another, you are his guest. He was very wealthy man, honorable man, but he was as well very generous man. And when the Kaaba was built, Banu Makhzum financed quarter of the Kaaba and Quraysh the rest. In the Battle of Badr, Banu Makhzum provided 30 horses and over 200 camels in the battle. And Al-Walid mentioned in the Quran, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى رَجْلٍ مِّنَ الْقَرْيَتَيْنِ عَظِيمٍ في سورة الزخرف. How come this Quran came to this man and not me? Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, who died before the battle of Badr. And when he died, Rasulullah ﷺ said, Jibreel came with great news. One of the Tughah, the oppressors of Quraysh, was killed. And he basically said, Alhamdulillah, that this is happening now. This man basically listened to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as we said in Surah Al-Zukhruf, and Allah mentioned that what was going inside him, ذَرْنِي وَمَنْ خَلَقْتُ وَحِيدًا وَجَعَلْتُ لَهُ مَالًا مَمْدُودًا وَبَنِينَ شُهُودًا وَمَهَّدْتُ لَهُ تَمْهِيدًا. I give him everything, wealth, children, tribes, honor, power, but of course, subhanallah, he didn't come to Islam and he died. Khalid ibn al-Walid, his mother is Lubaba bint al-Haris al-Hilaliya. Lubaba is the sister of al-Mu'mineen Maymuna. So Khalid has a relationship to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam from his mother's side. And his mother is the sister of al-Fadl. Al-Fadl is the wife of Al-Abbas. And Khalid wal-Fadl, which is the son of Al-Abbas, Ammi Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they were very close friends. And Asma bint Umays, as well, sister of his mother. So you can see that Khalid radiallahu anhu warda was very close to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And his brother Umara ibn al-Walid, when Quraysh was trying to put an end to the da'wah in Mecca, they went to Abu Talib and they said to him, how about you take one of our sons, wealthy, honorable, good looking, and give us Muhammad to kill. Who was that person? Umar ibn al-Walid, the brother of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Of course, Abu Talib made the statement, you give me your son to raise and look after, and you take my son to kill? No, that will never happen. Khalid radiallahu anhu arda was born 28 years before the Hijrah. He was younger than Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhum ardahum ajma'in. Khalid ibn al-Walid migrated from Mecca to Medina with Amr ibn al-As and Uthman ibn Talha after Al-Hudaybiyah. And those three, Rasulullah ﷺ said, the best of men of Quraysh came to us. Amr ibn al-As, we will talk about him, radiallahu anhu wa ardah, wa Talha, radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'in, Bani Abd al-Dar. He participated in many battles in Mu'tah and was nicknamed the Sword of Allah, and he took part in the conquest of Mecca and of course Hunayn and Tabuk, one of the major battles of Islam. This is the letter from Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira to his brother Khalid, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked me about you. فَقَالَ أَيْنَ Khalid? Walid says that Rasulullah, he's writing a letter to Khalid, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and asked me, Ya Khalid, where are you? Where is your brother Khalid? And then he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَاسْتَدْرِكْ يَا أَخِي مَا فَاتَكَ فِي. Come and join us, you're missing so much. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a statement that he will look after him. He used to have respect for Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah. Al-Waqidi, one of the historians, said about one of the battle that Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah had with Heracles, that he captured most of his family, and one of them his daughter. So Heracles sent the ambassador to Khalid ibn al-Walid with a letter saying, this is Heracles talking to Khalid, I have come to know what you have done to my army. You have killed my son-in-law, we'll talk about that in a major battle, and captured my daughter. You have won and got away safely. I now ask you for my daughter, either return her to me on payment of ransom or give her to me as a gift, for honor is a strong element in your character. He's talking to Khalid man to man. But Heracles is a well-known army as well, generals. So he's talking to his equivalent, Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah, who wrote back and he said, take her as a gift. There shall be no ransom. And this is to show you again the character of Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah, how he used to deal with those heads of states. At-Tabari, in the history of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the king, he said, Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah neither slept himself. They used to say that he never used to go to sleep. Of course, he have to go to sleep. How can that be? But the problem is, nor did he let others sleep. So you don't want to be a boss under Khalid ibn al-Walid. They used to say the same thing about Umar ibn al-Khattab. He never used to go to sleep. Because when we go to sleep, what do? We go to the bedroom with the beautiful blanket, and we have the pillow. We go into bed. But these characters never go to bed the way we go to bed. They either fill because they are very tired, and then once they get that nap, they just up and operate. And Khalid would always fight in the night, the surprise attack. So he didn't want anyone to sleep. If he's not going to sleep, they are not going to sleep. Nothing could be kept hidden from him. He will have his eyes open, and definitely he will get all the information that he needed about his the enemies. Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah died. He died in Bilad al-Sham, Syria today, in a place called Homs. He's got a beautiful masjid there. Not sure if the Shia left it. I know that they hit it hard, but it is a place where he died. Listen to him, radiallahu anhu wa ardah, when he was dying. He didn't die in a battlefield. He said, I fought in so many battles, seeking martyrdom, shahada, that there is no spot in my body left without a scar or a wound made by a spear or sword. So if you look at his body, it's all basically hit by either a spear or sword. And yet, here I am. He was lying on his bed, dying on my bed like an old camel. May the eyes of the cowards never rest. This is the something that you have to listen to very carefully, and as well respect the fact that he wished that he would die in the battlefield. And then he didn't left it open. He said, for those cowards, may their eyes never rest. لا نامت أعين الجبناء, as we say in Arabic. One of his followers around him said, Ya Khalid, you must understand, when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam named you the sword of Allah, and look at how they used to talk to each other, those people, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam named you as Sayfullah, the sword of Allah, he predetermined that you would not fall in battle. Sword of Allah cannot fail in a battle. If you had been killed by an unbeliever, it would have meant that Allah's sword had been broken by an enemy of Allah, and that could never be. And this is on the deathbed, so see kind of companionship that you have around you. They were all, of course, dream of Shahada, and radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'in, comfort each other in that. As I said, he died in Homs. When the news came that Khalid radiallahu anhu wa ardah died, we knew that there was a rift between him and Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu wa ardah, and that rift, of course, was used in the wrong direction. And that came very clearly when Umar radiallahu anhu wa ardah heard about the death of Abu Sulaiman, Khalid ibn al-Walid ibn al-Mughira al-Makhzumi, al-Sahabi al-Jalil. It has been said that on the day of Khalid's death, Umar was in Medina. Umar cried excessively. Later, people learned that his grief was not only caused by his personal loss, but by the loss of his last chance to return the command to Khalid. At the end of Khalid's life, Umar radiallahu anhu arda, and this is something that we need to know about Khalid, he appointed Abu Ubaidah Amr ibn al-Jarrah to be the leader of the Western Front, the armies, and Khalid part of that army. Abu Ubaidah knew that he's got a genius with him, and Khalid at the same time can see the battlefield, can read, and had a strategy, and he will always, you can imagine, always will come to the meetings with the leaders, and he will put the plan forward, and Abu Ubaidah will say, this is gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will do what Khalid said. And he will take part of the army and said, you stay here and you come with me and you will go there. Allahumma musta'an. Abu Ubaidah is the leader, not you. But all of them knew that Khalid is a special in everything that he would do in the battlefield. And actually there was a fitna that people wanted to fight with him. And the reason for that is because he won all his battles. And that's exactly what Umar radiallahu anhu ardah was worried about. That people will think that victory comes because of Abu Sulaiman, Khalid ibn al-Walid, not because of وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. And look at the hikmah and the wisdom of the Khalifa. And as well, the obedience of Khalid. When you are at that ranking, and you're expanding, and the army cannot do without you, you could easily turn around and said, turn to Medina, I'm going to lead a revolt against Umar, and I'll be the new Khalifa. This is the command that brought Iraq under control in no time, Bilad al-Sham under no time. He could have turned around and did this, but Khalid, Sahabi al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, dunya was not his affair. He wanted to fight for Sabilillah, and he straight away stepped down when Umar asked him to do so. But did he step down? And this is the statement that Umar radiallahu anhu wa ardah was about to change his order to give the Western Front back to him. But as he was heading down, he died radiallahu anhu wa ardah. He said, may Allah have mercy on you, Abu Sulaiman, Khalid ibn al-Walid. What you have now is far better than what you had in life, akhirah. For you are now with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You were honored in the life, and content in death. He said, radiallahu anhu wa arda, let the woman of Bani Makhzum say what they will about Abu Sulaiman, for they do not lie over the likes of Abu Sulaiman. Weep those who weep. This is the place, or the rest place of Khalid radiallahu anhu warda. We'll talk more about him, as we said, because the conquest of Iraq and Bilad al-Sham will all be under the leadership of Khalid. And as you can see on the right hand side, these are the battles, and most of them you will see the red dots in Bilad al-Sham and Iraq. And he took Iraq from the south, a place called Al-Ubulla, all the way to the north in the side of Al-Furat. So you've got Digla, Al-Furat, these two rivers in Iraq, and you will see him that all these red dots, this is actually battles against the Persians, and all won by Khalid radiallahu anhu warda. And then he will be asked to cross a desert in a daring sort of mission from Al-Iraq to Bilad al-Sham to lead the armies. And you can see all these red dots showing you he radiallahu anhu warda led the battles all the way to Turkey today, the south of Turkey. And this is where the what we call later on in the time of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu warda, al-Masayif wa al-Mashati. Masayif wa al-Mashati were campaigns by Amir al-Mu'mineen al-Khalifa Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiallahu anhu warda. Every summer and every winter he will mobilize an army to go to Constantinople, because they know hadith al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that it will fill. And the hadith, the first army to go and fight in that part of the world in paradise. And this is again another group that we don't know much about, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam give them the glad tiding, and with them Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. And if you have been to Turkey, he actually died on the then during that time on the borders between the Muslim lands and the Byzantine, and he's buried there until today. This Mashati and Masayif, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Zayd, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, Abdullah ibn Zubair, all the heads of the companions participated during the time of Muawiyah radiallahu anhum wardahum. And this is where Khalid radiallahu anhu wardah took them over there in his campaigns against the Romans. His helmet as well is basically one of the things that in one of the battles, after the battle is finished, he made all the army to stop to search for a hair. That hair was given to him, and he would always had it in his helmet. This hair was from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and you can see the panic that Khalid went through losing such a precious piece from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And they said that he asked all the army to look everywhere until they have found that beautiful piece of hair, and he put it back to his helmet radiallahu anhu warda. Umar later on said that I have asked Khalid to step down because people started to believe that victory comes because of him. Wa wallahi, all victories come from Allah. And Khalid acknowledged what Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu warda have said. Inshallah, next time we meet, I will talk about the conquest briefly of Al-Iraq. And in Al-Iraq, Khalid will lead 15 battles. He will lead 15 battles. All of them will be basically won, and some of them will be against Arabs. Al-Iraq basically, when you go south, there were Arab tribes, and on the side of Al-Furat all the way there are Arab tribes. But even though they were basically living in that part of the world, they were ruled by the Persians. They were ruled by the Persians. So they didn't have any political, if you like, decisions in their life, and they work for the invaders, or they were basically like what we have seen the Romans call them gladiators. They were the same for the Persians. But they were in a much better position than the Arabs down Arabia, because they had a far much more wealth and they had a far much better life, but they didn't have their own political freedom, if we call it that way. And to show you that how wealth and powerful Iraq was, that the Persian set up, as I said, their capital in Al-Madain, which in Iraq, not in Iran, in Iraq, in that part of the world. There were few revolts that led by the Arabs in Iraq against the Persian, but they were all basically suppressed, and people were put to the sword, and they couldn't basically stood against the Persian until, and this is where Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wardah started to see a space for the spread of Islam to the Arabs in Iraq. One, because they have the language. Two, they were oppressed under the Persians, and that actually led to what he asked Khalid radiallahu anhu wardah to head north, and he will start with Al-Ubulla. Again, Khalid radiallahu anhu wardah, as he did with Al-Murtaddin, he will have a letter from the Khalifa, and that letter would be directed to any city that he will go to. First of all, he will call them to La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and if they refused, then it will be the jizya, the tax, to protect you. And the third is basically to fight. And when you think about what we have said about the Romans and the Persians in terms of civilization and army and equipment, and the generals, these generals, they have to go through schools, military schools, and graduates. They are nobles. They are basically well known for their politics, for the management of their men, for their fights, for, of course, their honor. And here we have a new wave of Muslims or believers coming from Arabia. They didn't actually have any of that. They had La ilaha illallah. And inshallah, we will see the conversation that took place between the Muslims and the heads of the states, Yazdajard and Heracles, and the rest of those leaders during that time. أقول ما تسمعون استغفر الله لي ولكم وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.